Any sign of Mr. McEleny? Have we lost him?
He seems to be having some problems, yes.
Okay.
He's joining. He's quote joining at the moment.
Okay. Have we got many in for it, Neil? Do you know?
No, Angus.
We should just wait and see.
50.
50.
Good. Oh.
Our conception. Down the hallway, right behind the door. Oh my God. What is it? What do you need?
No, go off, mate. Go off it.
Andrew, Chris says he's waiting on host to let him in. Have you seen him?
I know.
Okay, we can start, I believe so. Hello and welcome everybody to tonight's All Under One Banner Zoom panel. We've had this publicised for a while. It's been much anticipated and it's on Plan B. So we're joined tonight by Christopher McEleny and Angus MacNeil, and the title of the event is "Should Scotland Have a Plan B to ensure the UK government can't block the people of Scotland determining their own future?" So the way it's going to work is a couple of introductions from All Under One Banner, and then we'll go straight on to Chris and Angus, who will outline Plan B. They're the architects of it, so it's fantastic that they're joining us tonight. And this is your opportunity to ask your questions direct to Chris and Angus. Now, whether you're, a warm welcome to you, whether or not you're joining us on Zoom or on any of the platforms that this has been live streamed on, you're most welcome, and we hope you enjoy the experience and get a lot out of that. So without further ado, we're just going to crack on, and I'm going to pass it over to Suzanne.
Hello there everybody. It was just to outline how we want things to run tonight. We're going to be taking questions from social media platforms, but anybody that is within the Zoom, can you please ensure that you're on mute whilst other people are speaking, because we don't want any background noise. Also, if you would like to directly ask your own question to Chris or Angus, can you please just next to your name in the chat box type a Q? And if you would like Neil to read out your question, can you type your question in full? That's fantastic. I'll pass you over now to Chris, who's going to outline Plan B.
Should be off mute now. Yep. Hi, hope everyone's enjoying as good a Christmas as possible. So really grateful for all under one banner hosting this event tonight, because ultimately if Scotland wants to achieve independence, we need to bring the majority of Scotland with us. And if we want to have an effective campaign, we need to bring the majority of the independence movement with us. And of course, although I'm an SNP politician, I absolutely realise that independence is bigger than any one political party. And I suppose when Angus, MacNeil and I first started talking about Plan B, it was a couple of years ago, we were concerned that we were getting ourselves into a tactical position, that we were giving Boris Johnson a veto. Of course, at the time it was Theresa May, by saying, can we have a Section 30 request, please? And that made it very easy for the UK government to just reject the premises and say, no, now is not the time. And as we approached the UK election in 2019, which was a very foolish election to support, and obviously I'm very proud that Angus was one of the few people that rejected that, because at that point we had a UK Parliament, we had Boris Johnson, as Angus said, in a cage, and now we'll see next week the consequences of giving them that supermajority. But in the run-up to that election, we were concerned that simply winning another election to ask for another Section 30 request, the answer would be no. And of course, you remember back at the time, everyone said, well, the answer won't be no, because it'll be unsustainable for the SNP to win another huge mandate and for the UK government to say no, even though we have that mandate. And of course, you may remember that some delegates took umbrage to the SNP conference, even debating independence, and I was booed from the stage. But what happened was the SNP won 48 out of the 59 seats, a clear manifesto commitment to give the people of Scotland a choice on their own future. And in January of this year, Boris Johnson ultimately said, no, you've had your referendum. Self-determination was for one day only on the 18th of September 2014, and none of you get to choose again for another 20 or 30 years, which we heard shortly after that nonsense. So, I mean, if we just reflect back, well, why do we then need a Plan B? Because in 2016, the SNP won a historic amount of constituency votes, the largest ever amount of people voted for the SNP in 2016, with a clear manifesto commitment that if we were dragged out of Europe against our will, we had the right to hold a referendum. Now, arguably, we were dragged out of Europe on the 31st of January of this year, because that's when Scotland left the EU with the UK. But it's now beyond all doubt that we're out of the European Union. The deal is in place. It's a deal that absolutely is not as good as the deal we had in the EU, but the uncertainty is now gone. So there's a clear manifesto commitment there that we have a mandate to hold a referendum. In 2017, we won the general election. You know, Unionists will spin that we lost the general election by winning a majority, but in any other Western country, it was a landslide victory. We won the council elections in 2017. We won the EU elections in 2019. We won the UK Parliament election in 2019, and every single democratic opportunity, the people of Scotland voted for the right to choose, and the UK government said no. Now, in the lead up to the election in May, we're being asked to believe that now it'll be different. We will win, I hope, a majority, a pro-independence majority, and with 16 polls, and who knows how many by the next May, saying that the people of Scotland now want to be independent. At that point, even though Boris Johnson has previously said no and Theresa May has said no when the no side was ahead, now that the yes side is ahead and the SNP has won another majority, making it likely that the people of Scotland will vote for independence, at that point, the UK government will agree to a referendum when they know they may lose it. Now, that makes no sense to me, and I don't think it makes any sense to the wider independence movement. That's why we need a plan B. And I think tonight we're going to talk through what that plan B is. Now, I think quite clearly we missed a tactical opportunity back in the general election, because we could have used that election to progress our mandate. But instead we've just went for the one more heave strategy. So May now gives us a real opportunity. Do we want to go into these elections saying, vote SNP one more time for one more mandate, to be told no? Or do we want to go into that election, turning that very election into the democratic opportunity that people in Scotland can express clearly in a legal, safe and democratic manner that they want Scotland to be an independent country? And I would put it to you, that's a plan we should grab.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. Now, Angus, let's hear from Angus MacNeil.
Thanks very much, Neil, and Merry Christmas and all the Crea, everybody. I hope you've had a good one, as good as it can be. And just the first point that came in my head there when Chris was talking, he got booed in Aberdeen and I wasn't even there. Normally when Chris gets a boo and I'm usually around. But to the serious point, the matter is, we believe Scotland should have a vote on independence. And that's basically the start and the finish of the whole matter. Now, after that, unfortunately, we started getting into the mechanisms of this. The preferred way that the party policies at the moment has been for a number of elections is to ask the UK Prime Minister to get a Section 30. And that's been done a few times, and every time the answer's been no. I've done it in letters a couple of times, in November 2018, again in November 2020. I asked Boris Johnson on the 15th of September at the Select Committee, when he's only 3 metres away from me. It was no again. The Scottish Government last year were telling us at conference that it was that Plan A had momentum. The letter would be written at the opportune moment. Anyway, the letter was written after the election, which I thought was a tactical mistake. I also thought the election was a mistake. So only Scottish MP that voted against that. And that's where we find ourselves today. So we've asked a number of times and it's been said no. No was given to us in January, as I said, and it was predicted and predictable that that was going to happen. And we predicted it, and it came to pass. Now, the simple matter is, if we do the same thing again at this election, which Boris must be praying that we do, is we don't get an independence referendum. The 2026 election will be, as Seamus Mallon might have put it, the 2021 election for slow learners. The opportunity cost there is 5 years. We don't want to see that happening. We've got a short period of time to stop making Boris Johnson the most important person in Scotland's constitutional future. It's meant to be self-determination, but this is all at the mercy of Boris Johnson as UK Prime Minister to decide whether we have a referendum, regardless of our majorities or not. And that's a crucial difference between Plan A and Plan B. Plan A is asking the Scottish people, can we ask the UK Prime Minister, then can we go back and ask the Scottish people a question? Plan B accepts that, yeah, we'd like that to happen. We'd like to have a referendum, a vote, after all is what I said. We want to have a vote on independence. But Plan B goes direct and gets the question answered. It's not a question to ask a question to ask a question. It gets the answer in May. And I'm pretty confident the Scottish people will vote for independence. We've got, is it 17, 18, whatever many polls. We were promised about 2 years ago in polls that if we got a hard Brexit, we'd see about 59% of Scots supporting independence. If we've got the hard Brexit, so the polls of January and February will be fascinating. But if we don't have a mechanism or a way of harnessing those poll numbers at the ballot box, folks, nothing's going to happen. Boris will say no. Why would he say yes? And we get nothing happening for independence. That's the long and the short of it. If we nail our colours to that one mast, that's why we need the insurance policy. That's why, yeah, we can play the game of Plan A and say, let's do that. But when it fails, we have a fallback. If I was in the Scottish Government just now, after each and every poll, I'd be thumping the table and demanding my Section 30 here and now. I would demand the Section 30 and give them a deadline to the 31st of March and say, if we don't have our Section 30 by then, you, Boris Johnson, are making the May the 6th election the plebiscite on independence because of your intransigence and stubbornness and not respecting the view of the Scottish people if they vote for a referendum. So if he doesn't allow the referendum, we just cut to the chase and have that vote for independence. And the point is, the major point is that is the most legal and democratically and internationally accepted democratic event that's going to happen in Scotland in the next number of years. But the final point I'll make is some people say, Well, Boris Johnson might say no to Plan B. Well, if he says no to Plan B, he's already said no to Plan A. So that's firstly a clear sign that we'd be going nowhere. But the second thing is very difficult to say no to Plan B, because Plan B is asking the people, and the people have spoken. So Boris Johnson saying no to Plan A, he's merely saying no to politicians who say they've got a mandate. Saying no to Plan B puts him in the territory of Lukashenko of Belarus, and he's saying no to the people. Now, the number of Conservatives I know personally, and quite like personally, obviously don't like their politics, would be very upset to be in that sort of territory internationally when they travel the world. So let's force his hand. Let's not make it easy for him. Let's not make vetoing Section 30 consequence-free. Let's put Boris Johnson in a difficult position and let's move Scotland forward. With the opportunity to do this on May the 6th, or with the opportunity to do the same again and wait until 2026. Cheers, folks.
Okay, thanks very much, Angus. That was excellent. Same with Chris. So the first question to bring in is Peter A. Bell. Peter Bell, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi there. Hi. I'm not sure which one I'm asking first. I've got
if it's difficult, you're asking Chris.
Right. Hang on a minute. Okay, we'll go with this one. If adopted, Plan B changes the context in which Boris says no. Is it not possible that the threat of Plan B will oblige him to say yes, which he will only do if he knows he can sabotage the process at a later stage and blame it on the SNP?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've said, unless you want to go first, Chris, one of the things we've said is sort of Plan B stops the veto being consequence-free. It enables the Scottish people to speak at the ballot box and to give their opinion, and Boris Johnson can't block that. But we have to get our ducks in a row. The Scottish Government has to take this seriously, put this before the Scottish people in a serious manner, and allow the Scottish people to speak. So absolutely, Plan B either enables Plan A, or if it doesn't enable Plan A in itself, gives the answer from the Scottish people. So it's a win-win as far as I can see. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, the UK government is a huge beast. We're naive if we don't think there's an entire department behind the scenes, not seeking any credit or gaming all of this out. And, you know, the demand for a Section 30, which, you know, it becomes this great panacea, but Section 30 is the mechanism by which you temporarily amend Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act. It doesn't mean you must have a referendum the same as the deal Alex Salmond secured in 2012. So, you know, I would be surprised if the UK government's tacticians weren't thinking things such as, we'll just keep saying no, because, you know, they're the ones that say it's got to be a gold standard. They're the ones that say it's got to be legally binding. You know, we never spoke of gold standards in questions of legality until the SNP introduced those very questions. Up until that point, we quite easily understood that Scots law and English law were two distinct entities. So Boris Johnson's got some easy outs and he can just keep saying no, because we've established that the only way we want to have a referendum is if Boris Johnson agrees. So naturally, Boris Johnson just keeps saying no, and we don't have a referendum. But then maybe the political pressure becomes too much then. Who's to say he's got to offer the Section 30 under the same terms as 2014? He may say, okay, have a referendum, but we want to agree to this in defence, this on currency, we want a 85% turnout threshold, we want 65% have got to vote yes for it to be a mandate. Then we would be in the position that we would be the ones that are faced with the choice of accepting the deal that nobody wants to accept or walking away from that. And I think that's the very naive tactical situation we've allowed ourselves to enter into. Whereas we've got an opportunity now that, you know, I know some people such as yourself, Peter, think we should abandon all ask for Section 30. But the reality is a lot of people in the country remember 2014 and they think that's an established process.
Yeah.
I think that it makes sense to say, let's have a referendum that both parties can agree to. But if we make that ask, and, you know, we've already made it a few times, and they say no, then we need to be in a position, obviously we'll maybe go into the Martin Keating situation later, that, you know, the only reason the Section 30 was used in 2012 as part of the Edinburgh Agreement was that the legal competency hadn't been established. It hadn't been established whether or not the Scottish Parliament had the sovereignty to hold a referendum. Salmons used it as a clever tactic to just put it beyond all doubt, but that's what Martin Keating's is currently testing in the courts at the moment. But the reality is, if we can't have the referendum because the UK don't agree to it, well, that shouldn't stop us. But if we want to have a referendum and somehow we manage to be blocked in court, then we need to ask ourselves a simple question: how do the people become independent if we accept that we can't hold a referendum? And you really only need two key tests. One, you need to be sure that a majority of people in Scotland want independence. And two, you need a mechanism to evidence that. And I would argue with anyone that tells me that after hundreds of years of democracy, that elections are somehow no longer democratic and no longer internationally recognised. That's just false.
Thank you very much. We've got a question for Angus, and this is from David Allen, and he asks, dissent about inaction on Plan B within the Indy movement is becoming louder. Do you believe Nicola is stubbornly ignoring it, and why?
It's very hard to get into somebody else's mind. I just wish we had a debate on it. Twice we've asked, you know, in 2019 when we asked, we had all sorts of spurious excuses. We closed them off this time. I mean, Chris was ever inventive when he suggested that we amend the fairly tepid Let's Brace a Scottish Government motion at conference to include this. It was quite an inventive stroke. He even went as far as to go to Aberdeen to get booed, which was showed his determination to do this. And this year when we did it, we even got the National Secretary involved and made sure he dotted the I's and crossed the T's and make sure he was happy. You know, I just wish we had an insurance policy because, you know, we said in 2019 if we did this, and I just couldn't believe we waited until after the election to ask, because we should have asked before the election and then got the no that was inevitably coming and then changed our ask of the people at the election. But if we don't have a different ask at the election, we're going to get the same again. And we knew in 2019, you know, some people thought there was a secret plan. Well, the secret plan is there was no secret plan. That was the big secret. And we found that out in January onwards. And the secret plan for after the 2021 6th of May election is there's no secret plan either. We either get a referendum. If we go at it in this way, we get a referendum from Boris Johnson or not, and the answer is going to be not. So to guess, you know, we as an SNP can't blame one person who happens to be the leader. You know, we can't say that the leader's all responsible. We can't also imagine that the leader's all powerful and infallible and predestined to always make the right decisions, because when we look back quite clearly, everybody makes mistakes, and there's been tactical mistakes in the last number of years as well, which is why we didn't get anything out of the 2019 election constitutionally. So it's not just the First Minister, there's many other MPs, ministers, everybody else has got to step up to the plate on this, and members and branches, and demand this as best they can. Maybe that's easier said than done.
Okay, thanks, Angus. So I'm going to bring in, we've got a question from Robert McAllister on Zoom. Robert, if you want to unmute yourself, looks interesting about if smaller parties have got a plebiscite in their manifesto. Are you there, Robert?
Hi, how you doing? The question was basically if something has been mooted that some of the smaller parties will have a plebiscite in their manifesto. If that being the case, and you get a majority indie parties in the Holyrood, and the SNP don't have it in their manifesto, where does that leave us?
Chris, I'll let you go first on this. I've got a thought, but unless...
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote a column in the National maybe about 6 months about this, basically urging this was the lead up to the last SNP conference, urging that the SNP's NEC should be reaching out to other pro-Indy parties, because of people say this is the most important election in the history of Scotland, and as well as all the obvious devolved matters, this election is the independence election. We should be reaching out to the wider independence movement. And I mean, absolutely, the SNP, the Greens, other parties they'll have differences in their manifestos, but we should come to a common position on independence, so that every single pro-independence vote means the same thing. And I think that's why it's unfortunate that we've waited until January of the election year to be having this debate. If we'd had it a year ago, that gave us more time. But, you know, all under one banner is a massive lobby group within the movement. The SNP having a National Assembly at the end of end of January to discuss these very things. And I think that what should be coming out of that is that we should be going to other pro-independence parties, because, you know, we might not agree with domestic issues, but we all agree on independence. And if we all agree on independence, surely we all agree that the most sensible position is that every single independence vote counts for independence, so that we can't have an obscene situation that Boris Johnson can try and claim that 15 or 20% of the vote doesn't count because it wasn't a vote for the SNP, because let's not be surprised if he'll do that. But I think a key point we need to remember is that in 2019, so that was a UK general election, and the UK government, they released the standard press release about a referendum every single time, saying it's a reserved matter and it's not for the Scottish Parliament. And they said that again today about the Keating's case. So how does that make sense then? So if it's a reserved matter, but the SNP won 48 out of 59 seats in the reserved election, why was that mandate not good enough to deliver the referendum? But in the devolved election, if we win a majority in that election, Boris will change his mind. I just think that's a point we don't often make often enough, because, you know, there's always the debate of whether Mrs. Thatcher said it or did she not. But you all remember growing up that a majority for the SNP in a general election was a mandate for independence, but that just isn't cool anymore. But I don't think we should forget it, you know, that we won 56 seats in 2015, we won 35 seats in 2017, we won 48 seats in 2019. These are historic seismic votes that no one in the SNP would have ever predicted would have happened, but they have happened. And if we're being truthful, what have we done with all those votes to pursue and advance the case of independence, with honourable company excluded, obviously?
I mean, I think if I can just jump in there, a good question, Robert, and there's a couple of extra thoughts that have come my way. At the beginning, I said, you know, we need a vote in independence, and there's two ways to get the vote. There's the vote at a referendum. We use the ballot boxes that are stored in offices and whatever at a referendum, or we use them at an election. Now, as matters are at the moment, Boris Johnson blocks the ballot boxes from being used at a referendum. Unfortunately, also, as matters are at the moment, pardon me, the SNP policy blocks the ballot boxes being used at an election, which is the most legal and most internationally recognised thing that happens in any country ever. So that is a huge disappointment if that happens. But to your specific point, should we talk to others? Yeah, we should certainly lead by example, I would say, and do it ourselves. It also probably opens a flank that perhaps we as SNP, or I as SNP, don't particularly want us to give opportunity to other political parties. Usually in politics, you try and close those loops off. So that isn't probably the best thing that we are doing. Also, you know, we really should think about that and make sure that we're putting the election, we are about independence. We aren't going to make things better in Scotland until we sort the upstream issue. Loads of things that, you know, even the unionist parties were calling us to mitigate this and mitigate that, even from their own colleagues' damage down the road. Now, we shouldn't be having this damage inflicted on us, but we do, and we can, because of the constitutional architecture over Scotland, and that's what we're trying to change, so that we can get rid of terrible child poverty figures and food banks and all sorts of other nonsense that we've got in Scotland that we shouldn't have. But we aren't going to change things unless we've got independence. Now, that sometimes shouldn't need to be said, but if there are any sort of floating voters or unionist press looking in, that's the sort of thing that they forget about, that independence is an upstream issue that sorts and diverts power so that downstream issues can be tackled. I hope I've answered your question reasonably well, Robert. I think I've meandered a little bit, like the river, the proverbial river I was talking about.
Thanks very much for that, Angus. Okay, we've got a question from Facebook, and it's Robert Wilson's asked a very interesting question. Do the panel think Wales will go for independence soon, and will Scotland be first to go?
Well, I mean, I think from Wales, there's something very interesting happening there. is the Welsh National Party, Plaid Cymru, are not in any way embarrassed or shy or reticent about now striking out for independence. They make the case all the time. Their opponents might moan about it. When our opponents moan about it, sometimes we quieten down on it. The reason they're moaning about it is because we're actually hitting a nerve. So who knows what's going to happen? But I think there's certainly a huge change. You know, I suppose in many ways this opportunity has come around because of Brexit. That changed a fundamental part of the Scottish promise and the Scottish contract in 2014. It was vote for the UK to stay in the EU. Now, something like 52% voted to stay in the UK and 60-odd% voted to stay in the EU. So it's a greater percentage of Scots value the European Union more than they did the UK Union on the basis of what turned out on each particular day.
I suppose just an interesting point on that as well. It's obviously Plaid have never had control in Wales, and one could have argued that maybe you needed that period of control, the same as the SNP had, to evidence to people. But what the coronavirus has done for Wales is people see maybe for one of the first times is that actually when Wales makes its own decisions and doesn't have to wait in Boris actually makes more sense, just the same way as many people are seeing that in Scotland. So I think that whether Wales becomes independent before Scotland, I don't think that will be the case, but I think it's clear that when Scotland does become independent, it would be inevitable that we would see Wales pursue and advance their claim to independence. And probably you would likely then within that word a generation see reunification in Ireland. And I think that's why Angus talks about the Tories, and I suppose you get the two different types of Tories. You get the kind of Little Englanders that don't really care about the union, and you get the ones that care about the union. And the British unionist element of the Tory party is petrified of Scottish independence because for them it will be the end of a 300-year project of empire, and be under no doubts with Scottish independence it will be the last nail in the coffin of the British Empire. And I mean, you've seen some person on Twitter last night was talking about how we will fight to the death to stop Scottish independence. And these are the things that when people from all under one banner on the SNP and the Indy movement say they make the front page of newspapers, but there is a British nationalist unionist element out there, and they absolutely will do anything they can to block Scottish independence, whether that's cheating or blocking elections, as we see through Boris Johnson. But I just think that the case in 2014 nearly got us over the line because of that positive vision. And I know there are arguments on currency and on policy matters, but we then open up a can of worms into, if independence is what Chris McEleny or Angus MacNeil thinks independence should look like, well, that might not be independence to Neil Matheson, James Kerr, or Alex Wallace. And if we then lose votes because people say, well, that wasn't the currency I wanted, that wasn't the pension rate I wanted. That's why I think it's really important. And I think All Under One Banner do a really good job of getting the question back to sovereignty and the right and the ability to make decisions. And if you just look at the coronavirus, absolutely mistakes have been made. And I think no government in the world has done this perfect. But what people see is that when you've got the right and the ability to make your own choices, the people that come first and foremost are the people you're represented, you're elected to represent. And I think that's why currently we're seeing all of these polls, because I know coronavirus is a horrible issue, and I know so many people have been affected by it. But many people for the first time are maybe starting to realise, so you know what, imagine that it was Boris Johnson making these decisions. It kind of makes sense that we make them. And if it makes sense that we make them on this, and why are we spending £200 billion on Trident? Why are we spending £50-odd billion in HS2? Maybe if we made all of these decisions, we would get better outcomes. And I think that's going to be the legacy going into next year. And it gives us a land of opportunity, that there is a real prize at this May election. And if we go into this election saying just vote SNP so we can ask Boris Johnson if we can have a referendum, I think that's a real mistake. Whereas what we should begin into this election is saying, vote for independence, vote for Scotland. And I think that'll be a clear mandate that we can then say, we've got it.
If I could just come back in on the Welsh point there, I agree a lot with what Chris said. I think things aren't going to really improve much for Wales until it is independent. And if we think back the 98, 99 years since Ireland became independent, Ireland was the worst bet of the UK, of the then UK nations. The current UK only dates to 1922. My favourite trivia question. But anyway, they have leapfrogged because of their independence and the choices they can make. Now, if Ireland was still in the UK, it would be today worse than Wales. As it is, Ireland's number 2 in the UN's Human Development Index that was published 3 or 4 weeks ago, only second to Norway. So a country to Scotland's west is number 2 in the world, and a country to Scotland's east is number 1 in the world. I think we're in quite a good locality to make things a lot better in Scotland for an awful lot of people, but we just need the power, so we need the decision making. We don't want the decision making made by Rishi Sunak and by Boris Johnson. They're better off made in Scotland by whoever Scotland chooses to elect at each and every election subsequently.
That was excellent, Angus, thank you. So next question, linking on with what Chris was talking about a moment ago about the lengths that the British state will go to, is a Catalan type situation. What happens? What will happen in the event of Plan B? And what do you think will come of that? So to bring in Laurie Cervantes, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Well, my question is about the Catalan-like situation, because I come from Spain, from the north of Spain, and well, I support the Scottish independence, and I would like to know, what do you think that the UK government is willing to do if there's a Catalan-like situation of stalemate? I don't know if you know what's been happening last year since the declaration of independence by Puigdemont in Catalonia, and what the SNP would do in that situation.
Okay, I mean, yeah, a very good question. I think that in the first instance, I'm always, in the past, I used to try and people stop talking about Quebec, because we read erroneous lessons and translate erroneous lessons from different situations. The one thing I will say that is pretty obvious to me in this, I look at 3 capitals in Europe: Madrid, London, and Copenhagen. And Madrid has got a terrible attitude and behaviour towards democracy in Catalonia. You don't jail people, and there's also an awful silence at the top of European countries. Guy Verhofstadt, very notable in the European Union, has got something to say about everything, never says a word about the Catalan situation. But London isn't like the Spanish government. It doesn't behave like that, and it won't be jailing people. And we won't be in that situation where we have to go to that. I think we've got a clearer route that the Catalans didn't have. But London is neither is it Copenhagen, which is the situation with the Faroe Islands. Choose what powers you want to take whenever you want them and just go with it. So there are 3 differences of an approach that I see quite notably in Europe. There's the Copenhagen approach, and it's probably the same towards Greenland as well. It certainly is towards the Faroe Islands. And the Faroe Islands, 50,000 people, far more powerful than the Scottish Parliament, have done remarkable things. It's the best 4G in the world. They've just built an 11-kilometre tunnel sub-sea for 50,000 islanders. That's twice the size of the Hebrides, for goodness sakes. So it goes to show what can be done. The UK government are somewhere between Copenhagen and Madrid, but they just are not like that. Can't see that situation arising at all around. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I think the first point is, as you rightly say, about the European Union. You know, I like Europe, but it doesn't mean I'm totally in love with the political institutions of the European Union. And when Scotland does rejoin the EU, I would like to see much reform, because I think that one of the major failings of the European Union is that it's been absolutely silent, that there are political prisoners in continental Europe as we speak. And we've heard little of next to nothing from any of the EU's leadership, and I think that's really is a sad state of affairs. But I suppose when you get back to this lawful, there won't be a referendum in Scotland that's not lawful. So there will be a national returning officer. There will be 32 local returning officers, which will most likely be chief executives of councils. And I suppose the difference in Catalonia was, of course, there was political control at municipal level, whereas across Scotland, SNP, we don't have a majority in any council. and there's a pro-independence majority in just a few councils. So, you know, the only way a referendum's going to happen is if a referendum bill goes through the Scottish Parliament and the Lord Advocate of Scotland deems it lawful. So that's a lawful referendum. Then if the UK government wants to challenge that and take you to the Court of Session and the Supreme Court and deem it not lawful, then it wouldn't happen. You would need to challenge that. Or if they don't challenge you, then it's a lawful referendum. So I think that's a distinct difference that unionists quite often like to say, well, it'll be Catalonia, you know, we will have a referendum unless it's through the Scottish Parliament and lawful. It's a pretty key point, but I just think it does link back into that European question, and I hope there's some questions about that, because, you know, in 2016 I absolutely voted for Scotland to remain in the EU, but in that scale of 1 totally against the EU and 10 totally in favour, I was like 6 or 7. What I want Scotland to be able to live and exist and cooperate peacefully with the countries around us. I want us to be able to trade between Scotland and France and Spain and Norway, that of course aren't in the EU. And I think for the majority of Scots, you know, that's really just what you're looking for. You're looking for something that reflects how you want to live. And I suppose the political levels of bureaucracy were the reasons that people did vote for Brexit. And there are a not inconsequential amount of Scots who support independence that did back Brexit. So when we're honing in on a new campaign, you need to be careful, again, as we were saying earlier, that would people that voted Brexit not vote for independence the next time round because they did want to be out of the European Union, and vice versa? And I think that's a really easy way to just sum that up. It's not about whether Scotland has left or whether we remained. It's about what we voted for being respected. So Scotland voted to remain in the EU, so we should remain in the EU. If Scotland had voted to leave, that would have been a different situation. But one of the benefits I think we do get from Westminster is that people like Angus get to chair pretty hefty select committees. So we International Trade Committee, I think it's called. So yeah, we've got people that understand trade, and we've had the benefit of 4 years of seeing the real mess the UK government has made of things. We should be able to have a playbook of here's all the mistakes that you don't walk into negotiation with, which hopefully will stand us in good stead, because we will, whether we like it or not, have to negotiate some sort of settlement, whether it's called the Scottish Anglo Treaty or whatever. We'll need to negotiate a treaty after independence. And that's something I think groups like this, national assemblies, should exist to talk about, you know, because it shouldn't just be a case of you vote for independence and then, you know, in 2 years' time, that's what it looks like. The people that vote for it, the people that don't vote for it, should be invested in starting to put the building blocks in place.
And if we can just say a final point on that Chris sort of mentioned, there's sometimes chat about illegal referendums, and the illegal referendum would be just impossible, as Chris was alluding to, because you can't get the ballot stations manned, you wouldn't get the votes counted, you wouldn't get the returning officers turning out. It just can't happen. So if there's a referendum going to be in Scotland, it will be legal, or else it's not happening. It's not there.
Thank you very much. That was a brilliant question, by the way, and
answers.
really liked that one. We've got Lee, who's on Facebook, who has asked a question I see quite a lot on social media. Why do we need permission from the UK government to have a second independence referendum? Is it not a voluntary union we're in?
Well, I think if I go first here, I'll be brief, Chris. We've probably both got loads to say. We need a mechanism to establish what the Scottish people want. We're not certain that the Scottish Parliament has this power. This one Martin Keatings is doing. We do know that the last time he's got through a Section 30 order from Westminster. That's why we need a ballot box event of some kind to prove that internationally and legally that the Scottish people want independence. Now, what myself and Chris are saying with Plan B is, in the event of Plan A not working, which take it as read, it ain't going to work, that we use the ballot box event at elections. Now, we either do that in 2021 or we do that years later. That's the way we have to go. We can't decide any other way. We need the permission of the people to do this, is what I'd say. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need permission, but we don't become independent just because I say we don't need permission and I think it's a good idea, let's become independent. And that's why Angus and I had 3 points of Plan B. The first point was reflecting that in 2014, we had a mechanism that the whole country, whether they voted yes or no, agreed was a valid mechanism. So we said, well, okay, let's do that again. But if the UK government say, no, you're not doing that again, we don't just say, well, that's it, we can't have a referendum. We say, well, let's have our own referendum. And by asking first to repeat the Edinburgh Agreement, that group of people, those undecideds, you might bring them with you. Whereas if you just say to hell with we're going with it, you might lose them. And then likewise, if the UK government can block in the courts us having a referendum, that's what the plebiscite, the election becomes a plebiscite. So the referendum becomes a plebiscite. But if we had said at day one that that's it, the election, council election 2017, this is a referendum on independence, people would have said, how is it? That's not 2014. So you would lose those people. So what we and Angus have been trying to do the last 2 years is evidence to people that, look, we wanted to have a Section 30 referendum. We wanted that. That was our first preference. The reason we're not having that is because the UK government don't want you to have a choice like you did in 2014. And when they blocked that choice, we wanted to create our own referendum in Scotland, deemed lawful by our own Lord Advocate. And if we won the election on that mandate, hold that referendum. But they've blocked that as well in the courts. So you've got a lot of people there saying, well, hold on, Scotland should be independent. So if they won't do this Section 30, you know, which I still think is a niche issue, but you know, everyone in this room, in this meeting knows what the Section 30 is all about, but I still think it is a bit niche getting that across the majority of Scotland. But if people say, well, they won't let them do that, they won't let them do that, well, what does that leave you with? How do you go to 50 to 60% of the country being in favour of independence and wanting to express that? You've got to use the ballot box. But what you've done is you've not just went straight in there, you've evidenced to the people that Boris Johnson has blocked them having a choice. Boris Johnson has blocked you giving them a choice. And the only way you can now express your choice is in the election. And I think that brings a whole big group of people behind the legitimacy of that. And that's all you need for Scottish independence, as I say that as if it's easy. All you need is the majority of the people and a legitimate mechanism to show that the majority of the people voted for it. And that's what would happen in May's election if we made it about that.
That's great, thanks, Chris. Next to bring in Roddy 1314 on a really important question on how we get the SNP leadership to agree to this.
Can we find out which side Roddy was on in 1314?
The right one.
I was with the Barhead division, so we were all right. So I am more affectionately known as the Barhead boy. But if I could just make an observation before I get to my point. I'd like to agree with my good friend Peter Bell, which I don't always do, I've got to say. But on this Section 30 thing, which I think is wrong, there is a danger, is there not? And this isn't my main question, that a danger that Boris, because they're strategists, I think our problem is we lack strategy as a party and a movement. But they are strategists, they've been doing it for hundreds of years, and they say, okay, I tell you what, we've changed our mind. You can have your Section 30. However, you need to have a 2/3 majority. If you lose this, you have to wait 50 years for another one, and it has to be held on a Tuesday. They can put any conditions, and then we go, well, that's not acceptable. Say, well, you had your chance, bang goes your chance of a referendum. So I am been promoting, and I do believe in this plebiscite. I think it's at the moment our only escape route and our only legal, inverted commas, possible way. However, our problem is not Boris Johnson or legality. Our problem's internal. And how do we get the leadership and Nicola Sturgeon to actually realise that? Now, there's a difference between being dogged and determined and being downright bloody stubborn. And I would like to know how, it's great for us all to agree, and I think from what I'm gathering, there's plenty of support for an independence plebiscite throughout the movement. And I think the numbers are there. I think the numbers are there, no bother for a yes. But our problem is the leadership of the SNP. Now, if they won't let you debate it, even debate it at conference, how the hell are they going to say, well, we've changed our mind now and we're going to have a plebiscite in May because it's the way forward? So this talk's great, but how do we make it happen?
That was a $6 million question that Chris McEleny is going to answer.
They won't change their mind. There's the I'm an electrician, I'm not a politician answer. They won't change their mind, right? But we've got the opportunity to move their position. And I think that the plebiscite should happen. But we're not going to go for that, right? That's me being honest with you. There's no point in me saying, yep, we'll get Nicola to change her mind and she's just going to agree to it. But what I think can happen is we can push the position away for the Section 30 being a panacea. I think we can push the leadership into a position that, you know, a referendum's a referendum's a referendum. The public of Scotland just know what a referendum is. The mechanisms of whether it's a Section 30 or the Lord Advocate in the Scottish Parliament, a referendum's a referendum. And when we win in May's election, we're having a referendum come what may. We're not going to Downing Street with our tail between our legs to ask permission from the Prime Minister of England and the rest of the United Kingdom to let us have a choice in our own future. We're having a referendum. We're putting a referendum bill through our Parliament, where Lord Advocate is deeming it lawful, and we're having a referendum. Now, Boris then wants to take us to the Court of Session. We'll beat him. Pretty confident Joanna Cherry would beat him. If he wants to take us to the UK Supreme Court, then it's a bit of a win-win situation for us at that point. Because if we beat him in his own turf, then we're having that referendum. But if Boris Johnson somehow manages for a referendum bill to go through Scotland's Parliament on the back of the people of Scotland voting for that in an election, when it goes to Scotland's highest court, and Scotland's highest court, just like it did with the prorogation case, deems that we should have a lawful referendum. And if a London court then blocks the people of Scotland having a choice in their own future, that 50, 60, 60% goes over 60 towards 70%. Right? That's what I think will happen. And this, Suzanne mentioned earlier on about secret plans. Secret plans is the biggest political bluff and bluster you will ever hear. You cannot win independence for a nation by going to the ballot box and voting for something for 6 weeks later for them to pull a rabbit out of the hat and say, ha, here's what you were really voting for. It's a nonsense. You must be honest with the people. You must set out methodically what it'll look like. And this is what it'll look like. We will have a referendum. But if the bloc is having a referendum, then we're not just going to say Scotland can't be independent and people in Scotland can't have a choice. There is another mechanism, thanks to a supermajority. The Scottish Parliament could have a new election. The government could resign and we could call an election. And by that point, you've evidence that they wouldn't want to give you a Section 30. You've evidence that you try to have a referendum and they blocked it in the courts. How do people in Scotland then make choices on whether it should be more bedroom tax, £200 billion in Trident, a generation of austerity to pay for the COVID bill? How do you evidence to people in Scotland that the only way we can take our destiny into our own hands is for independence? You've done it at that point. And that leads us on to an important point, and one I think the SNP need to think seriously about. To do that, you might need a 2/3 majority in the Scottish Parliament. So should we elect a pro-independence majority to the Scottish Parliament with Murdo Fraser, Annie Wells, Richard Leonard, name your unionist, or should we elect a super majority to the Scottish Parliament, which will put it beyond doubt that the Scottish Parliament is a pro-independence parliament? And that's going back to that question earlier. The SNP NEC need to have serious grown-up talks with the other parties. Because as I said at the start, you know, the record number in the history of the Scottish Parliament voted SNP on the constituency. How many list MSPs did the SNP deliver for independence? How many? I'm an SNP politician and I believe in SNP policies, but above all else, I believe in independence. And I think that the more pro-independence parliamentarians we can get elected, the stronger position we're in.
Can I come in on Roddy's point? I mean, I think, you know, it's harder to move away from the central point that Roddy made and it was an internal problem. It's that we're not getting motion from the SNP, hierarchy, governance, well, whoever's deciding at the top. There's silence from near the top. It's been blocked twice to discuss this. I mean, we shouldn't be having this debate. I know one politician said that we shouldn't be having these debates publicly. Well, they're not happening privately either. And we have no strategy for a Boris veto, as we saw in January. We've discovered as well, had no strategy for Scotland being taken out against their will in Brexit. That's something else that we've got to face up to, you know. So sometimes I think there's a tendency to sit back and imagine that leaders can be omnipotent and know everything and be absolutely fantastic at press conferences, flying planes, growing gardens, whatever you name, strategies. But sometimes, you know, skill sets are different. So if we don't have a change, Roddy, and you know there's opportunity to do that. There's a pivoted Brexit. There's been pivoted polls. There should be demanding going on constantly from Michael Russell for a Section 30. It's not happening. So you know, I'm at this point on the 28th of December, with what, 5 months and probably a week or so to go to the Scottish election. You're right. I mean, you do confront us with a very real problem that unless something major happens in the thinking of the SNP, which will be the largest pro-independence group in the Scottish Parliament, then by blocking the election for independence and Boris blocking the ballot boxes to use a referendum, there's no really to go except carry on this conversation in June. You know, that's basically when Boris says no again for the next number of years. And that is probably why we're having this event, in that we're trying to do something, and I hope the penny drops with some of our colleagues, that Boris will say no. There's no way Boris, I mean, my friend and colleague Peter Wishart said he could be ground down. Why is he not being ground down now then? He would be ground down. We are. Let's get a grip of what Scotland is. We're 8.1% of the UK population. We're about 50 to 60% of that 8.1 wants independence. So that leaves Boris Johnson with about 95 to 96% of people, at best indifferent, at worst against Scottish independence. He doesn't give a monkeys about Scottish independence, or the majority of the Scottish people. I mean, the majority of the people of Cornwall want something, doesn't really, or Norwich or whatever, doesn't really bother us. Just to give you a context of the thinking there. So, Roddy, you take me to a profoundly depressing place. We'll bring it back to 13-14. The news was cheerier then.
Thanks very much, Roddy. It's nice to see you, by the way. Okay, we're going back to Facebook, and we've got David Dand, who asks a slightly controversial question. How do we guarantee that voting won't be tampered with again this time?
Well, again, sorry to be controversial with a party put, but I don't believe it was tampered with. I'm a local councillor. You know, the polling places which I go around all day, which I've forgotten how many times I've been around them in the last decade, the amount of elections we've had. It's the same people that are working in our schools, you know, are working on our roads, are working in our health and social care, or our home helps, that are sitting there watching the ballots. I'm one of the sad people that still follows the ballots in the cars back to the counting place. And then it's our teachers, our classroom assistants, you know, our active schools coordinators. It's people in our community that then count the votes. So we lost the last time. I think because of things like the vow and false promises, which scaremongered people, grannies getting told they wouldn't get their pensions, and people being lied to. It wasn't for any other reason. And I think we'll win it the next time by understanding why we lost it, fixing those issues, and continue to build a bigger positive case for yes.
Yeah, I think I would back up what Chris is saying there. I mean, when I saw the votes being counted in Stornoway, I knew there were some pro-independence people counting those votes. Obviously, I'm sure some not pro-independence people counting them. But you know, when the individual ballot boxes from particular areas came in, here in Barrow, we were 86% pro-independence. I think Isle of Eggs tells me they were 100%, but you know, the areas were different. It's the same people that were in charge of that. So there's, from our point of view, sadly, it was what it was, but at least we had 48%, which was above the national average at the time. So it was a bit better than it was some other places. So the cities did well. I'm back in another depressing place. Move on, please.
Okay, we'll move on, Angus. Right.
Because I seen a question and it wasn't addressed, was postal vote. So I mean, obviously quite in vogue with the American election. But again, if you're an election agent, you'll be familiar with the process. And Ruth Davidson has a lot to answer for, because she really caused a lot of people not believing in the legitimacy of the process. What happens is the postals come in, right? So do you trust your postie? Yes or no? It's a sad day when we don't trust our posties. But so they come into your council, your counting areas, and then those votes get opened, right? Because they're in 2 envelopes, and they get opened and they get put into a ballot box. And I know that I would do this, of course, because I'm led to believe it's an offence. If you're sleek-getting quick enough, you can get a look at some of the votes. So that's what she's done. So she's seen probably that, and it was the case, you know, so in 2014 Inverclyde, our stacks for yes were going up. And then when we seen all these postals dumped, the stacks for no went up. And the reason there's just, it's a correlation between the demographics of the voter and who votes postal. And it's actually quite important, I think, next year, because if you look at the US election, so, you know, you woke up in the morning and the bookies were saying Donald Trump had won it because of these huge leads he had. But then all these votes that were coming in were postal votes, and the Democrats had this magnificent campaign to get people signed up for postals. So in some areas, 95% of the votes coming in were Democrat votes.
Yeah.
So in May, you know, you've the coronavirus, you know, I don't think I get my vaccine until July or August. You're still going to have a lot of issues with physical distancing. People might not want to go out. So I know the SNP are going on a big massive drive to get people to sign up for postal votes in January. And I think that'll be quite important, because I think that that'll be something the Tories will be really good at, the Labour Party will be really good at. So this probably will be a very strange election, because I think this will be the first election in history that more people will have voted before the day of the election than on the day of the election, which political parties need to wake up to, because, you know, some, including the SNP, don't announce their manifestos sometimes until 7 days before the election, when you've had people have been voting for well over a week. So that's something I think we need to be really alive to, is how do we then manage to turn out or vote for independence as well? Because we should still be pushing that there should be a referendum in 2021. We shouldn't concede that, no, we need to wait until everybody's had a vaccine, because, you know, that could be 2022 and whatever economic policies the UK government enact we're signed up to. But how do we manage to get all those people that voted in 2014 to come out and vote, when, if we're being honest, there was big groups of disenfranchised voters there? Like, you know, the turnout was 85%, so there was a fifth of the population that don't bother voting in a normal election come out and vote for independence.
Yeah.
Where did they go in this kind of new COVID postal world?
I think in 2017, just a minor point, the Corbyn bounce, as it was fabled, happened between the postal votes going out and polling day. So in my area, we saw Labour doing slightly better than they usually are on polling day. But then when the when the postal votes came in, that wasn't reflected at all, because they were more typically as we would have expected them to have been. Of course, we did dip, as we all know, in 2017. We certainly had a dip in the islands, majority went down. So that's the way elections kind of go. I just saw in the chat there that Susan has put a point in that, you know, the election being postponed in May. There's two things that jumped in my mind about that. Is maybe it gives us more time for making sure the SNP gets its ducks in a row and doesn't make Boris the most important person in the election. But the second point is, will other countries be doing the same? And if we do postpone the election, what's that saying about in a number of other areas and ways about infection in Scotland, or how we can deal with it, or whatever? So I haven't got an answer, but I've just got points. But it's a good point Susan put in. Thanks, Susan.
We'll get a really interesting question here from Brenda Carson. If you want to bring Brenda in, if you want to unmute yourself, about who decides what's in the manifesto.
Hello, hi. I've been in the SNP most of the past 50 years, and this is the most depressed I've ever been, because it seems to me that we've squandered all these mandates that we've given the SNP. So what I want to know is who actually decides if we want to have a one-line manifesto. In other words, I can say to my neighbour, if you're voting SNP, you're voting to get an independence referendum. No ifs, no buts, nothing about gender, nothing about schools, nothing about housing, nothing about anything else. One line in the manifesto. Who actually decides this? Is it Nicola? Is it the NEC? Is it the Assembly? I mean, is there any mechanism to make it a vote from all the SNP members, or is it some other committee? I don't know. Could you help me, please?
I guess Angus is going to say over to you, Chris.
Chris is the great constitutional guy. He's going to say something about the deputy leader, I'm sure now, but a lot more besides.
Well, thanks very much, first of all, Brenda, for 50 years of effort towards the cause. I think that should be recognised. So, yeah, again, I know everybody's known SNP member. Constitutionally, Keith Brown, the deputy leader, has a responsibility for pulling together the manifesto. We're a lay-led organisation, so everyone should get to feed in policies, and that should then go all the way up to the top and create this manifesto. In practice, there will be staff members putting together bits of the manifesto. You know, you got a manifesto announcement at the conference on free school meals being extended to primary 5, 6 and 7s. Good policy, I would say. So the reality is you'll have staff members who we pay for putting this together, feeding in from the cabinet secretaries that think, well, that's an opportunity, and that comes together into a quite hefty document of like 100 pages. Nobody reads a 100-page manifesto before they go to vote, myself included. I'm a liar when I say I do. So you're right, it comes down to the key pledges. So that'll be, like, a key pledge will be the free school meals pledge, 4 or 5 others, but you're right, they should all very important, you know, education, transport, criminal justice, important matters, but this is an independence election, so top of the bill on the front page has to be independence for Scotland. So that's what people have to know they're voting for when they go to the election. But I mean, you make a really good point. I think it's why groups like All Under One Banner get so much support, because there's such a latent potential amongst the independence activist community. And then when you try to hone that into a political party who have quite complicated structures, you know, antiquated ways of actually getting input into these structures, you know, people just want to maybe turn up, march, talk, come up with ideas, and you don't get to do that quite often. Sorry, you don't get to do that quite often. And I think that's why these are really good opportunities. And you just are supposed to conclude that the SNPs having the National Assembly at the end of January. We've only really started having National Assemblies when people started demanding the opportunity to talk and discuss. I don't think that should be limited to the SNP. I think All Under One Banner should continue to do that, whether it's on education, whether it's on transport, whether it's on Angus's Rest and Be Thankful. You know, it's just basically seems to be into the long grass for another 10 years. I think that there is a demand in Scotland that people want to talk about political opportunity that you don't get in political parties, and then you can actually use those conversations to dictate how the political parties should then be pursuing their manifestos.
I think what Chris is basically saying there is email the deputy leader of the SNP, Keith Brown, if you do want to see this happening, because that's one way of feeding in your wish on this, so that people know it's not just myself and Chris periodically writing stuff on the National about this, but that people do want this. It'd be great if it happened, because then just we've got the numbers. We just need the ballot box event to move Scotland forward. It's crazy that we're having to discuss this in our own side, to get on side to enable this. I mean, we're blocking independence at the ballot box at the elections. We're blocking, then handing it, making Boris most powerful. He blocks it, but actually it's us again, because we shouldn't have given Boris this position. It's head doing. Sorry.
Okay. So just to be clear, we've all to email Keith Brown saying that we demand that number one, and in fact, in my case, I'm going to say the only thing I want to see in the manifesto is that they make this a manifesto for a plebiscite. Is that correct?
You've heard it from Brenda Carson tonight, folks. So that is the top idea.
Okay, thanks. I'll be doing that right away when this is finished. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brenda. That was fantastic. Loved that. Right, we've had a few questions all kind of on the same theme, so I'm just going to kind of group them all together. A lot of people asking about what you both think about the Martin Keating's case.
About the what? I didn't catch the last bit.
Martin Keating's case.
Martin, okay. Well, I think it's a good idea. I mean, I think something's got to happen somewhere to make things happen and move. And, you know, it should be the Scottish Government should have done this, pursued this the way they should be pursuing the Section 30. They should have avenues open. Who would have thought that after the Brexit referendum, which was a game changer, and we've got to say that had Scotland voted for Brexit, or had Brexit not gone through, then the independence wouldn't have got the big jump it got. I think there was big talk in June 2016, which is 4.5 years ago, of things happening. Nothing has happened. We're now on the cusp of Brexit. There has been no plan for Scotland. We are being taken out against our will. We are being disrespected. So something should have been happening in the last 4.5 years, and thankfully Martin Keating is doing something. Whether or not he gets there is another question. There are other questions about the legality and the approach. Is he better to be pursued? I think Chris has got a different point of view to me in this, which is fine too. If I'm right. But, you know, I'm going to see things happening, because doing nothing is not the best approach at all. Chris?
Yeah, I think 3 things will happen. The first thing I think will be that the court won't want to make a determination in an election cycle. So I think that because there could be obvious political ramifications, so I don't think there will be a finding before, even though I know there is listings for it in January, I don't think there will be a finding and a determination before the election. The second point, I think, is that I think they will, I was reading a constitutional lecture of Chris McEleny, who just happens to be from Greenock, on this today. I don't think that the court will look too favourably on making a determination on something that's in the abstract. It's not an actual thing, you know, whereas, for example, if the Scottish Government had said we're having a referendum, the Lord Advocate said it's lawful, and someone challenged the legality of that thing they'd be determining on. And the third thing is, I think that they will, in their determination, more or less point out that this is a political matter, which basically is code for the UK and the Scottish Government need to sort this out politically. And to go back to Angus's point, you know, I think it's a real shame that when, you know, we just heard from Brenda there, who 37 years campaigned to get a SNP, well, a Scottish Parliament and then an SNP government. I think it's a real shame that a private citizen's got to raise £200,000 to take this to the Court of Session when we are the party of a pro-independence party as the party of government. That shouldn't have happened. What I think would have been a better situation would have been for the Scottish Government just to legislate for a referendum. As I keep saying, if the Lord Advocate of Scotland's Parliament says it's lawful, it is lawful. It's then up to an interested party to take that to court and prove it's not lawful, i.e. Boris Johnson's UK Government. And then that way they would have been coming chasing you instead of you going to chase them for something that's still very, I mean, it's not within Martin Keating's gift to do anything with the verdict because he's not part of the Scottish Government. That's the real disappointment. The Scottish Government should have been proactive. They should have took him into their confidence. You know, these, Suzanne mentioned these secret plans. Was this one of the secret plans? You know, we were going to hold a referendum and go to the Court of Session. So, you know, very much good luck to him still, all that said, because if he can win the case, then I think it's quite fundamental. If he loses it, I don't buy this logic that it's detrimental to the cause, because, you know, the leadership of the cause at the moment say we need a Section 30 anyway, so it's pretty much irrelevant. But ultimately, I just think it's back to that point that if you want to lead the independence movement, I think that we're long past the time that the movement is following you, as opposed to taking your marching orders from the independence movement and the leadership leading the way in terms of which direction they're being pointed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something I maybe add on with to Chris's words there. I mean, what really got myself and Chris going in this was, certainly from my point of view, there were a number of things, but 2018 was the pivotal time. And I spoke to somebody high up in the Scottish Government, and it's now 2 years since the Brexit referendum. You haven't asked Theresa May for the Section 30. Why not? And the answer was, she's just going to say no anyway, so there's no point. Well, ask her and find it out for certain. Just don't assume it. So how long are you going to sit spinning us? So that's why I wrote in November 2018 my first letter for Section 30 to Theresa May. It's just a question of getting things moving. We've got to get things happening and moving. So that's what Martin Keating is doing. And good luck to him. And Chris made a cracker of a point there. If the Scottish Government have got secret plans, of course, I'll tell you the secret is there's no secret. And then why didn't they speak to Martin Keating in the beginning? I'm sure he would have, if they had any strategy at all around this, that he would have listened to their strategy and not try to hinder it. But of course, that is nothing else but the Section 30.
Okay, thanks, Angus. That was great. So we've got a question from on Zoom from Bob Fotheringham next about the behaviour of the British state. Bob, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Yeah. Before I ask my question, I just want to make it clear that I'm in favour of Plan B, Plan C, anything that brings Scottish independence closer. I'm in favour of it. But my question really revolves around the British state. And I think there's an element of naivety here about whatever route we take, constitutional route we take, to asking the British state or challenging the British state around the question of independence. I don't think the courts are neutral institutions. I think they are institutions of the British state, and I think to expect the courts to back up any plan, I think leads us down the wrong path. So my question really is when we reach the kind of bottom line here, what plan do you guys have to ensure that the British state will honour the democratic rights of the British people? Would you consider things like civil disobedience? Would you consider, action that brings people onto the streets to challenge the British state? Because I think to sit back and believe that the institution that is the British state will sit back and accept whatever we do without a challenge and a fight, I think is naive. So that's my question. What's your plan when we reach the bottom line?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. The SNP activists in the 1980s that said MI5 followed them were called conspiracy theorists, and then in 2018-19 the papers get published that special branch and MI5 were following them. We invaded a sovereign nation to steal their oil, being Iraq, on false intelligence. Bombs that are built in Scotland by the MOD are sold to the Saudi Arabian regime that are then dropped on children in Yemen. And meaning any offence to Angus, I hear some of his colleagues in the kind of new age group of SNP MPs saying we need to be seen as grown-ups in the room. If that's the sort of room you want to be seen as a grown-up, then you shouldn't be in that room. And I think that's something that our team of MPs need to remember, because quite often, and you can just look back to a few weeks ago when we thought we were big and mature calling for the UK to pursue multilateralism, because that's a mature thing that will get you respect among the upper echelons of the landed gentry, the British establishment. They're selling you a pup. That's what they want. First thing MPs get when they get elected, I know it was a long time ago for Angus, but they send you your British Army card and invite you on a recce. Do you want some fatigues to go on a parachute jump? It's just attempts by the British establishment to seduce you. And we need to resist them. And the reality is that that's the very establishment that, an establishment that can fabricate intelligence, documentation to lead to a war that killed 100,000 children and 500,000 Iraqis. That's the very same establishment that you're being asked to believe will turn around and say, give them another referendum, even though we're going to lose, because that's fair. I just think that's nonsense. So then what happens when we actually get that test, whether it's the election or the referendum and we win it? Then of course, the forces of darkness, as Lord Robertson once referred to, will come out. It'll be, you'll lose defence orders, there'll be the border patrols, all these scare stories to try and delegitimise it. And one big tactical issue we've got, obviously, was the efforts for a people's referendum on Brexit. Will there be a UK government move towards saying, there has to be a confirmation referendum now because the people of Scotland were mistaken when 70% of them voted for independence. They might have changed their mind. So all of these things will happen. So I think it's really, until we wake up on day one of an independent state, we are not independent. If we get a referendum or if we get a plebiscite that we all agree is on independence, when we vote for it, that doesn't make us independent. And I think that's important to realise. There will be an 18-month to a 2-year period that the British state will try and delegitimise and destabilise that result so that people change their mind, because obviously they don't want us to be independent, which has always, all my life, been a surprise, because, they're forever happy to remind us that we're subsidy junkies and, we're a drain on the British establishment. So it's always been a great surprise to me why they want to keep Scotland when we cost them so much money.
I take a slightly different view. I don't think they're that good and that organised. If they're that smart and that organised, they wouldn't be foisting a Brexit on themselves. It's going to do them 4.9% damage to GDP over the next decade, or even allowing some other allegedly smarter members to go on TV and to tell us they're going to have shiny new trade deals. Just for context, folks, the best of these trade deals is worth about 0.2% of GDP. That's with America, and that's a quarter of the world's GDP. So you're losing 4.9%. Just call that, I'll tell people, you're losing £4.90 and you're gaining about 20 pence from America, and given it's a quarter of the world's GDP, there's only about another 80 pence to gain after many, many negotiations. So I'm not that overawed by them at all. I've seen them up close. I've seen smarter in Reykjavik, to be honest. I've seen smarter in Little Tórshavn. I've seen smarter in Dublin. I've seen smarter in many other places. And I don't think we need to be overly worried about them. Obviously, don't be complacent either, but get our ducks in a row in the first place. I mean, that would be my answer to Bob, is I'll cross many bridges when they come to it. But if we don't get our ducks in a row for the election on May the 6th, and if we go at this asking for a Section 30, then you don't need a very clever organisation to thwart you. You just need one letter from Boris Johnson and the game is off, as we've seen in January. Now, I think that Plan B puts them in a different situation. They are reeling at the moment. Brexit is going to be trouble. It's going to be trouble in January and February for them. They've got the G20 coming in May. And if we were to make our plebiscite at the election at May on independence, very difficult backdrop to start playing a Lukashenko when you've got all those guys in town. So let's get our side organised first, and we'll cross the bridge of dealing with our opponents later. But at the moment, we're not into the gym getting ready for the bout. We're still wondering if using gloves is a good idea or not, or Marquis of Queensberry or whatever. We're just not at the races, to mix as many metaphors as I possibly can in 2 sentences.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Bob. I'm going to kind of combine, because we're kind of starting to run out of time now, so I'm going to combine 2 questions because they're quite similar. The first part is, do you think that the SNP MPs in Westminster, is it doing them any good remaining there? And the second part is, what do you think that the Westminster government is going to do at the Scottish Parliament come the 1st of January when all these powers go back from the EU?
Yes.
I'll let Chris answer that first. I've got my own biased view on this one. So
the further we can keep Angus MacNeil away from Scotland, the better. It's always been a difficult one, because it's important to win elections to advance the aims of the cause. So, we need people to vote SNP in a general election for whatever reason, which historically, even when we were in power at Holyrood, it was difficult to get people to see the difference. But, the reality is, and again, when I say I don't mean offence, Angus, normally offence follows.
I've noticed.
The biggest thing the SNP group have done since 2015, that cut through to the whole UK, not just Scotland, in terms of what they've done at Westminster, was walk out of the place. Nothing in the last 5 years has got more attention than people walking out. The SNP get 9,000 new members the next day from just walking out of the place. And I think that that's the tactical mistake we make. It's like, select committees are great. Like, let's sit on the select committee for the Duchy of Lancaster to make sure that Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Charles's property portfolio is getting well managed. I mean, who cares? Why, when we're being refused a Section 30 request, we should stop playing their game, because every time you play Westminster's game, Scotland loses. And there are examples in English Parliament, which I must say, I think it is an impressive Parliament in terms of standing orders, if you're into that sort of thing. There are examples in the UK Parliament when one member has brought a halt to the entire afternoon's committee schedule through their actions. And I think when you've got a team of 48 down there, you've got a lot of people that can be saying, this is what we want to achieve, and we're going to keep doing all these things until we achieve it, whether that's a Section 30 or where they want Ian Blackford to be respected at Prime Minister's questions and stop being heckled, where they want Angus MacNeil to get more questions because he's a great intellect. But we, at the moment, our strategy seems to be, let's be seen to be the big boys in the room. Let's sit on the Defence Select Committee. Let's sit in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Let's fly out to these countries to have meetings in Washington, DC, which, to be honest, I always remember the old adage, what's that got to do with independence? And the answer is not a lot. So I think we should take a more militant position in West. I wouldn't walk out of Westminster and go back to Scotland, because we don't do anything up here. Whereas I think we can destabilise, and Pete Wishart thinks you can grind down Boris Johnson. You can't, but you can grind down the institutions of the UK Parliament that will really frustrate them, really annoy them to the extent they have to concede and give you something. Whereas at the moment, we're not asking for an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've got probably nuances in that. Firstly, I'm shocked I've got a compliment from Chris McEleny there. That's a first. The spirit of Christmas lives in this 2020. That's a habit you can keep up, Chris. But I would say for MPs being there, yeah, no, MPs have got to be there. There's a whole load of other stuff that we're doing. Like, for instance, just one thing, but there's many things. I've got an interconnector I'm trying to get to Lewis at the moment. Knowing people, pushing on that, cajoling, all sorts of ways, that is useful to be there and speak to people. It'll be even easier if we're independent. We could just do it without all this, all the processes we have at the moment. And I think almost any other government in Europe running Scotland would certainly have decent cables to the windiest part of Europe. But, we leave that to one side. We do have to be there to do that sort of stuff, constituency stuff. We also pick up quite a number of things. We learn a lot of stuff around there. It's certainly useful being chair of the International Trade Committee to use that and to advance that for independence and to have the voice of independence coming elsewhere. The good thing is, since March, we haven't had to go down too much. I think I've been down once. I've managed to use the internet. My internet connection on a croft on the west side of Barra is better than it is in Westminster. And I voted. I went out to the shed in the croft here one day to vote, and I voted faster in Westminster. And productivity is an important thing in the UK. It's not great, but I voted faster in a shed in a croft on the west side of the smaller islands of the Outer Hebrides than I've ever done at Westminster. Doing something for productivity, showing that things can be done better. But of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg refuses that. But the point is, there's many things that we're doing and picking up as MPs. But yeah, I take Chris's other point, that, the walkout was successful, the being disruptive, the forcing our issue. We spent all of 2019 talking about a referendum, yet a second Brexit referendum, not an independence referendum. My call throughout that year was we give them a revocation of Article 50 option, or else we're on to pivoting to independence then. We didn't pivot to independence then. We carried on trying to reverse Brexit all of 2019 until we suddenly decided towards the end of 2019 we were going to cause an election which was going to free the Prime Minister and enable him to do exactly what we were trying not to have done all of 2019. 2018 was quite a dead year as regards independence too. 2019 was the year where we played Brexit and everything about it was Brexit and stopping Brexit. We even had that decides of buses, I think. So yeah, if we can, there are strategies and things we can do, and we're doing them as a unified lot. No, we're not at the moment, to be honest. Hopefully, things now, and the absolute obvious is happening with Brexit next week, that things will change a little.
That's great, Angus. Right, we've got a really interesting question about political pressure from Ross Weir. So, Ross, if you can unmute yourself and come in and ask your question, please.
So I was actually quite happy with you asking it, Neil, but that's fine. My question is that why do we believe that Boris Johnson will bow to political pressure when Nicola Sturgeon will not bow to political pressure from her own party and people of Scotland?
Ooh, cracker of a question. We're constantly asking Boris Johnson to do this, that, and the rest of it. I think even last week there was a question to ask Boris Johnson, would he do something for the First Minister? Boris Johnson, he won't bow to political pressure, absolutely not, which is why we need a plan B, an insurance policy to make sure that we've got something to fall back on when the inevitable, the predictable, and the predicted is going to happen again. So no, he's not going to bow to political pressure at all. And I can put a full stop there. Chris?
Can I come back at that then, please? So if he is not going to bow to political pressure, how is Nicola Sturgeon going to bow to political pressure?
Yeah. So
it's back to the emails and the pressure and the writing internally. Get onto your MPs, get onto your MSPs about this, a plan and a fallback. But the difficulty is the SNP is quite a hierarchical organisation. We lived in a feudal country and we behave in a feudal manner. We look to the top for guidance rather than encouraging. And there's one thing I often remember, it goes back maybe to Roddy 13-14. on the night before Bannockburn, Bruce didn't want to fight. And it was Neil Campbell of Argyll and Angus MacDonald of Islay that made Bruce change his mind the night before Bannockburn. Now, had that been the SNP, frankly, folks, the leader would have decided something and everybody else would have nodded their heads. That is not the best way to be doing things.
Yeah. So what you're absolutely asking us to believe that we can change Nicola's mind when you're telling us that we cannot change Boris Johnson's mind. We're looking at this problem from completely wrong attitude. The SNP are the problem here.
So just starting with Boris, but speaking in generality about political leadership. So the easiest decision Boris Johnson had to make throughout the whole pandemic was sacking Dominic Cummings, but he didn't, even though the entire Tory party urged him to do so. Which leads me to the conclusion that acts when it's in the personal interests of Boris Johnson. He's the Prime Minister. He knew he had another 4 years in office. He didn't need to worry about sacking Dominic Cummings because, you know, his timeline probably means he won't be standing for re-election anyway. So it's the same for Nicola as well. So what would make Boris change his mind and what would cause political pressure to work? Well, taking away from Boris something he wants, the job of Prime Minister. So if the political pressure was to such an extent the Tory party thought they had to get rid of him, we're now entering a post-COVID period that people are already starting to brief against Boris. I mean, you've seen a few weeks ago, Dominic Cummings went because there was a tiff between Carrie's new, you know, it's like an episode of Coronation Street and Downing Street. So the Boris Johnson premiership, I think, is coming to an end, you know, end being 2 or 3 years at the most. So I think that you will start to see likes of Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak, they'll start making moves to basically make the long knives. So that's how I think there is the opportunity for political pressure to work, but I think it's very unlikely, hence why Plan B, if we're not going to pressure Boris Johnson into giving us something, we're a sovereign nation, we just need to go and take it. But we then obviously need to make our own leadership adopt a more radical strategy, because let's get back to 2019 again. You know, we lined all the ducks up. You know, Angus and I were called unionist rebels or some stupid oxymoron like that. You don't need a plan B. Trust us, guys. It will definitely work this time. That's a proven failed strategy. So I think we need to make sure our leadership understand that it's unacceptable for us to win the election in May, ask for a Section 30, not get a Section 30 and just go, oh, we tried, you know, economic recovery for coronavirus is really important, education, all these other things are really important. And before you know it, if you get to 2022 and nothing's guaranteed in terms of a referendum, as Angus says, we're looking at 2024 as the next opportunity to have an election, that we can actually say this is an election for something. And at that point, you know, and I don't mind speaking frank, the current leadership will have been in government for nearly 20 years. You know, it's a natural period for a government to perhaps seek new blood. So we can't allow that to happen, because I think that Nicola Sturgeon leading the independence campaign is a really important asset, but there's not going to be an independence campaign to lead if we want May's election just asking for a referendum, Section 30, sorry, because what will happen will be the same as what happened last year. So this will be my prediction. The SNP will win a majority. They'll send out Alistair Jack for a few weeks to tell us that it was a once-in-a-generation referendum in 2014. They'll send Michael Gove to make a few statements for a few weeks. Then it'll be summer recess. Boris Johnson will eventually say something on October, and then it'll be Christmas, and before you know it, it's a new year. All of that inertia's gone, because we never actually done anything with it. That's what they'll do. And we've told them that's all they need to do, because we say it ourselves, gold standard, international recognition, Section 30 is the only way to get legitimacy.
And Westminster don't say that. I've not heard Westminster saying that we have one route. We've invented this stuff ourselves. There's another crazy.
This is exactly the case. So how do we exert political pressure on the SNP to do what the people of Scotland want and have voted for?
Quite right, Ross.
Because if you can't do it, you need to walk out. You need to get out of the way.
You're absolutely right, but I'm going to move on. We've moved on from that now. So Suzanne, do you want to come in and ask the final question, please?
Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay. Probably the most popular question that has been asked by lots of people on social media is, why can't we just dissolve the union?
Well, we need to establish legitimacy with the people, and much as I'd like to do that, I need to be sure the people are with me. And I do probably in recess of my mind have dictatorial tendencies, and it was just quite lovely to dictate that was going to happen. But unfortunately, I've intellectually succumbed and agreed and submitted to the idea of democracy, and I need that to be demonstrated that the people want to do that. And that's why we need to use the ballot box to do anything. If we're going to dissolve the union, of using that term for a moment, we need to do so with a ballot box permission from the people. But we then again have to put it to them at an election or a referendum. And at the moment we're in position not to do anything at all other than ask Boris Johnson to veto a referendum again. That's where I see it. Chris?
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's called Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, or Plan Dissolve the Union. What's important is that, first of all, it's a plan, it's coherent, people know what it means when they go to vote for it, and you get a majority of the population behind that. That's where you get legitimacy from, a popular majority. So, if 70% of the population of Scotland thought, let's just dissolve the union, of course that's got popular legitimacy. But I don't see any situation where you get to that level of popular legitimacy with a plan like that. Whereas I think a referendum, it's not abstract. It's something people understand. They've participated in them. An election, it's something people understand. You go to a ballot box, you cast your vote, and there's a winner. And if we get ourselves in a situation that a referendum is denied, then I think you can build popular legitimacy behind a proposition saying the only way the people of Scotland can evidence and attest that they want to be independent is by voting in an election, short of having a referendum. And if you get another point, just because I don't know if there's any questions on it, what if the unionists boycott an election, so they don't care about education or anything anymore? What if they boycott a referendum? It's to extent academic, because of 60% of the electorate or 70% of the electorate vote for independence. It doesn't really matter that the other 30% stayed at home, because you've got yourself over that middle line anyway. So I don't think they would boycott it. But popular legitimacy is gained by bringing a majority of people behind whatever plan, whether you want to call it Plan A, B, C, D, Z, and then you must have a test for that plan. At the moment, we've got a plan. Let's have a referendum, but we don't have a mechanism for testing the plan. Whereas in May, there's a mechanism for testing the plan. You get a majority of people in Scotland vote for independence in May's election. You have established that the majority of the people of Scotland want to be independent.
And remember, at this point, we've got huge assets with this. First, we've got a First Minister that's very, very popular, and who could be using a lot of that popularity to push independence, far more popular than Boris Johnson, doing a great job. The people are pleased with the First Minister. We've also got a European Union that's changed as regards Scotland for any future election. I'll put it ballot box decision. In 2014, the European Union's a members club. The UK was in the members club, and it could get noises, as we saw from Jose Manuel Barroso, that were helpful to it. That wouldn't happen this time. The UK and the UK government in a very weakened position. We've got the opportunity now to strike. I do remember Ross Weir's question. If we can't, we're expecting Boris to change his mind, but we can't get the top of the SNP to change their mind on something. And, it's a conundrum. It's a conundrum we've got to face and sort of think about. But we have to remember as well that they won't stand in the way of the people. So if we can get the people to express their views and at a ballot box, at the end of the day, they ain't as bad as Madrid, they aren't as good as Copenhagen, but the view of the people will be respected. So we've just got to get ourselves into a position where we are asking the people, what do they want, and listen to the people when we get that. But remember, there's a lot of things running for us at the moment. And this is why there's sort of an impatience and a frustration about the situation we find ourselves in. But hopefully things like this start to change things, and the emails start that we saw.
That's great, Angus. Well, we're now towards the end of the meeting, everybody. It's been fantastic. Unfortunately, a lot of the questions we couldn't get asked. There's just not enough time. But what we're going to do now is move to a summing up from Chris and then from Angus as to how you think this evening's went, and you're summing up about Plan B once again. And then Suzanne's going to talk, and then I'll close to finish. We're aiming for a finish for 9 o'clock. So over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for organising this event tonight. As already said, independence is bigger than the SNP. If everyone that voted SNP voted for independence, it doesn't take you anywhere near getting across the finishing line. And I think there's a really big opportunity at the end of January. The SNP's having a National Assembly to discuss things like this. What if Boris Johnson keeps saying no, which we know will say no? And why do we know that Boris Johnson will keep saying no? Because Boris Johnson's told us he's going to keep saying no. So I think we need to get ourselves into a position that the independence movement start demanding radical action. If we go into May's election, I'm confident that on coronavirus alone, which is what a lot of people are focused on, people will contrast Nicola Sturgeon to Boris Johnson, and they will make a determination on who they think has done a better job. And I think the answer to that is obviously Nicola Sturgeon. And that will get us an SNP majority. I think it will. That's before we talk about education, free school meals, before we talk about infrastructure, before we talk about prisons, before we talk about criminal justice, before we talk about the economy. And then we talk about all those things. And that will get us a majority. But what do we do with that majority? It's like winning election after election, but you're the party of independence. So it's good. It feels good. We heard from Brenda earlier on. She's been a member of the SNP for 50 years. She might even have stood for a candidate if she's been in the party that long. And there was 4 decades of losing election after election. So it feels great. I know a lot of people that have joined the SNP, younger people, all they've ever experienced is winning elections. But that's not why anybody should have joined the SNP. I don't think it's why anybody that is in this meeting will have joined the SNP. And it's not what independence is about. The SNP is the mechanism for how we deliver independence. And if we win to May's election and we win a majority, and we then go another 4 or 5 years without being able to deliver upon a referendum, I think that the troops will have been marched up the hill only to come back down again, one time too many. And we won't see people go and start voting the Labour Party or the Tories or the Lib Dems. What I fear is we'll see people just stay at home, because they'll gave us a good 10 years since 2014 when we've seen that mass political, the Second Enlightenment, arguably in Scotland. People from communities across Scotland that had never had a political bone in their body. They only gave this a good 10 years by this point, and it's a big, big ask to ask them to stay again for one more heave, to try the same thing we tried in 2017, 2019 twice, and now 2021. And at this time, it'll come with a different outcome. It won't. Boris Johnson will say no to a Section 30 request of the SNP win in May and the pro-independence majority wins. We need to ask ourselves, well, what do we do if he says no? Do we just say, let's keep going? Or do we need to, this time, like we did in 2019, but we never managed to achieve anything, do we need to get into a situation that we pressure the party into realising no is not good enough? And we need to have a plan. We need to have a plan B, an insurance policy, another club in our bag, whatever you want to call it. We need to have a plan so that the mandate we get at this election is used to test whether people in Scotland think we should be independent. It can't be a mandate to ask if we can ask a question to enact a mandate, because that's just word salad. And before we know it, it'll be 2022. Scotland won't be anywhere near a referendum on independence. And we'll be trying to elect Angus again in 2024, and we'll be trying to elect an SNP government again in 2026. And that's just far too long. And I'm afraid the game will be a bogey. The SNP will have been in government for over 20 years at that point. And I don't think any government in Western Europe will be able to sustain that. This is the time. We've got to deliver it now, and that should happen in May.
Okay. You want me, Neil?
Yeah, I was just a bit struggling with the unmute button there. Yep, fire away, Angus.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks to you both. Thanks to All Under One Banner. I see Andrew's been busy there as well. Thank you all for your work and organisation, Suzanne, Andrew, Neil. Thanks to the people who've come on and stayed and been on at certain stages. Well, there's always things on the go. I do appreciate you engaging with us and listening, and hopefully this has been useful. I mean, the long and the short of it is, I'll end with what I started with. We need a vote. We need the people to be able to decide one way or the other what they want to happen now that Scotland's out of the European Union. We find ourselves in a weekend situation. We see a country that is phase 1 of the UK departure, Ireland being number 2 in the UN Human Development Index. Hopefully Scotland will be phase 2 of that. Wales might be phase 3, who knows? But you know, we are seeing a wealthier and better off British Isles with the independence of Ireland, the independence of the Isle of Man, and the independence of the UK. It'll be better still when we've got the independence of Scotland and the independence of Wales, and we're all behaving and regarding each other the way the Nordics do, and learning from one another, rather than just have a cabal in charge that believe austerity is a good idea with an electoral system of first past the post that allows them to do this on about 40%. But we have to change what we're doing in May, or else nothing is going to happen, people. Nothing at all will be happening. We can be back and discussing this. And as I said, this could make the lack of a good strategic decision. If we repeat the same flawed strategy as 2019, the election in whether it's 2024 or 2026 will be this one for slow learners. It is bizarre that our policy is to make Boris Johnson the most important person in the Scottish independence self-determination story. It is strange that we leave Scotland's fate in his hands by offering him a veto gift wrapped. Now, if Boris were to say yes, and you know, I've been saying he'll say no, but if he's going to say yes, then that's fine. You don't need your plan B. But he's more likely to say no, and then you need your plan B. You don't want to find yourself having arrived and there's just nothing else in your pockets. There's nothing else that you've got to play. You've no other cards. And the situation we left ourselves in, we know this from in 2019. When he said no, the Scottish government, effectively, ministers went away with the tail between their legs. Nothing has happened, and nothing will happen again. So it's hugely important that we do get this happening. We need to make things better for Scotland. We can make things better for Scotland. This is why we're in the SNP. This is why we want independence. I've seen, and I'll end on this point, I live in the Hebrides, and probably what's good for Scotland would be my main interest, but certainly what's good for the Hebrides is my prime interest. And I compare us with the Faroe Islands, who are in a, you could argue, a geographically more disadvantaged situation. In the Faroe Islands, the population has doubled, if not trebled, in the last 100 years. The population has risen by 4,000 or 8% in the last 10 years. It's the highest birth rate in Europe. They own their own airline. They own many shipping companies. They build their undersea tunnels. Did I say the best 4G, going on 5G? And they're 52,000 people. They're now double the population of the Hebrides. They can do all this because they're just about independent. But we could do so much more for Scotland if we were in a neighbourhood that was a Nordic-style neighbourhood, and we were able to make our choices. We haven't been voting for the things that have come our way, the lack of investment that we're seeing constantly in Scotland, the blighting of people's lives. And this is another frustration I have about delaying this longer, is the casualties from this will be human. The casualties from this will be people who will be living in poverty, who will be going out to food banks, who will be getting the bad nourishment, all the host of problems we know. It's almost tedious to repeat them, but it's not. Yeah, they have to be. We have to remind ourselves why we're doing independence, why we're pushing this. We've got to shift the upstream issue, and the upstream issue is getting ourselves to a position where we vote for who we vote for is what we get making the policies for our country. Pretty simple, really. But ultimately, if we don't get a vote on independence, if we can't have a ballot box to express a view that is being reflected in 16, 17, 18, probably by May, say 30 opinion polls, then it's going to be for nothing. We need a mechanism to translate the opinion polling into votes at a ballot box. And at the moment, we have got no mechanism to do that. We are blocking the election ballot boxes, and Boris will block the other ballot boxes being used at a referendum. It's a frustration, but that's where we are. That's why we're here tonight. That's why you're appreciated your time and your interaction here with myself and Chris. Every time we do this, we learn something new, we think of something differently. And the idea that he would say no to a plan B is, I just remind people, it's a very different proposition to saying no to plan A. Saying no to plan A is an ask by some politicians up the road in Edinburgh. Saying no to plan B is saying no to an entire nation of people who just expressed their views at a ballot box. So let's cut to the chase and let's make sure that the people can have that say, or else we'll wait another few years when we do eventually get to that position. But that's what we're facing at the moment. I would like to leave it a more upbeat note. Myself and Chris will probably be doing more of these kind of things. Hopefully the emails will work to Keith Brown, and we will have a change. And you wouldn't need myself and Chris, everybody, it'll be mainstream. And if the leadership was to change tomorrow its point of view, those who oppose Plan B, a decreasing number, would change their views overnight, if not sooner. Probably within 10 minutes of it, they would run with that. It's just unfortunate that we haven't been able to get this to the membership of the party, because I'm pretty sure had we, either in 2019 or 2020, we would have let Plan A run its course. We would have respected those who were very much in awe of Plan A, that Boris would become a Scottish nationalist overnight and Boris would give us a referendum. But we are where we are. We need Plan B to make sure that Scotland advances. Tackle leave.
Thank you very much, Angus. You said you weren't going to talk for very long and then you just kind of went, didn't you?
I noticed you started, but politicians.
No, I know. I'd just like to... Oh, you can stop now. I'd just like to say a big thank you to both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you the last few weeks. Honestly, I've had such a laugh with you. I mean, you're so down to earth. I just, I can't thank you enough for coming and doing this in the first place. And thanks to everybody who came along tonight and has asked questions. Some of the questions were absolutely fantastic. And things that I didn't even know myself have been answered tonight. So thank you very much. For me personally, it's been really frustrating, and I'm a member of the SNP. It's been really frustrating that I haven't been able to discuss this at conferences. Why it's been blocked, I just do not understand. I don't see what harm it would have done being discussed, because ultimately we're all here for the same reason. We all want Scotland to be an independent country, and surely discussion is healthy, and coming up with the best solutions that we can is healthy, because we all want the same thing. Ultimately, something really bad is coming, because what is this Tory government going to do to our country? What are they going to do to our country when they get these powers back from the EU? It's really frightening. I hear it from people all the time, every day on Twitter. People are scared of what's coming, and ultimately May could be our final chance at this, because, well, we have a parliament left. So I hope that minds have been changed tonight. I hope some people have decided to get behind Angus and Chris with their Plan B, because really, do we have any other option? Thanks very much for everybody for coming, and I'll pass over to Neil.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, just to reiterate, it's been a pleasure working with you the last few weeks. We'll keep going with that, Angus and Chris, and we've all got to keep working together. We've all got to focus on winning this. And basically, yeah, if the manifesto is not fit for purpose, then Scotland is resigned to the Union for another 5 years, most likely, and that's the most probable. The fact that devolution, the time of devolution, the age of devolution since 1999 seems to be coming to an end, one way or another. It's either going to be Scottish independence, or it's going to be completely demolished by the UK government. So that's the way I see it. It's very much all or nothing, and we've got to push for it. This has been a great Zoom panel tonight. Again, there's been so many questions. I mean, that chat and Zoom, 91 new messages. It's rampant. It's still going. So people are absolutely enthused by tonight, which is a credit to both of you. And I want to say thanks to the All Under One Banner team who are working busy behind the scenes. Me and Suzanne have been co-hosting this night, but there's a lot of people involved. And also to thank Kevin Gibney of Independence Live as well, who's done sterling work in the last couple of days with promotion. Certainly for All Under One Banner, we're going to ramp it up over the next while as we get into the new year. There's going to be more of these Zoom panels to get these discussions and debates. We're not going to stop. And as soon as we possibly can, we're going to call marches. I mean, certainly the Arbroath march is on the 3rd of April, and then the Glasgow one's on the 1st of May, a few days before the election. And it's our full intentions that these go ahead. Obviously, we've got coronavirus to deal with. We don't know what the future holds. Nobody can really make plans now. It's infuriating. But you know, it's our full intentions to go ahead with that, and all of next year's marches. And we've got to give it everything we've got, absolutely everything we've got, and it's great to see this all coming together. So I just want to wrap it up. Thanks everybody for coming along and attending tonight. Hope you get a lot out of it. And
Neil, can I come back to you in just a second?
Of course.
I've had a message from Portsmouth, not involved in the Scottish independence, who watched some of this and said, why on earth would anyone ever not want to have a plan B? So it makes sense to everybody round about. Sorry to interrupt your train of thought there, but I think it's
I know why wouldn't you want? I mean,
it's Plymouth. Sorry, it's Plymouth. I just got a message. It's
Plymouth. But why wouldn't we want a plan B? Why wouldn't we want to discuss it? It beggars belief. But tonight we have discussed it. Tonight it has been outlined. Tonight the movement is spoken to you direct and got answers direct, and that is a great thing. So on that note, let's say cheerio. I can see Chris say cheerio with the dog as well. Right, wishing everybody all the best. Keep an eye on the Facebook page, on all our accounts. There's lots more to come. It's going to be a big year. Good night.